There is no point in expecting powerful men to change. Expecting self-serving leaders to reconsider their values is as futile as asking a scorpion not to sting. It is in their nature. This does not mean their actions should be accepted. It means they must be stopped. Every person, given enough power, will act according to their values. It's not a crime to believe in one's own superiority or entitlement. It's not illegal to favour one's own or to prioritise self-interest over the well-being of others. In fact, it's arguably a human right to act in the service of one's values. Psychologist Jonathan Haidt's moral foundation theory suggests that values are not chosen in a vacuum, but inherited and shaped by cultural and environmental influences. People feel morally justified in looking after their own because their moral instincts evolved to serve group survival. Philosopher Peter Singer's concept of the expanding circle argues that human morality starts with concern for the self and immediate kin before expanding outwards. Now, some people enlarge their circle to include many, even all of humanity, while others keep it tightly bound to a select group. Those who rise to unchecked power will not be convinced to share it. No argument, no moral appeal, no rational plea will shift their values. The idea that a tyrant might wake up one day and decide to voluntarily relinquish power is a comforting fantasy. History tells us otherwise. Aesop's fable of the scorpion and the frog tells the story of a scorpion who convinces a frog to carry him across the river. The frog hesitates, fearing that he will be stung, but the scorpion assures him, if I sting you, we will both drown. Well, halfway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog, and as they both begin to sink, the frog asks, "Why?" The scorpion replies, "It's my nature." Autocrats, dictators, and power-hungry leaders will act according to their nature. They will always serve their own interests, always demand more, and always betray those who trust them. The mistake is assuming that because someone has power, they are entitled to exercise it without challenge. Power is neither a right or an eternal gift. It is a condition that persists only as long as others allow it. Autocrats, despots, and even elected officials who exploit their office operate under the belief that their dominance is inevitable. Now, this belief is often their greatest weakness. Powerful men always overestimate their control. History is littered with leaders who mistook temporary dominance for permanence. Percy Shelley's Ozymandias captures the fate of those who believe their rule will last forever. "Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair." Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away. Napoleon believed he was invincible until he lost everything. Hitler's Reich was meant to last 1,000 years. It ended in 12. Gaddafi ruled Libya with an iron grip, convinced of his people's loyalty until they dragged him through the streets. Saddam Hussein dismissed the possibility of being overthrown until he was found hiding in a hole in the ground. Men who take too much power always think they have more than they do. They assume that fear will keep people in line, that the opposition is too weak to matter, that institutions will not break ranks. And then in a moment, it all collapses. Leaders who maintain a small circle of concern, those who only care for their own group, they have an easier time communicating their message. It's binary thinking, us versus them, good versus evil, strong versus weak. This is inherently more digestible than nuance. A leader who says we must protect our own and defeat the outsiders will be understood instantly. A leader who tries to explain the interwoven interests of multiple groups must fight against the human instinct for simplicity. This is why populist and authoritarian leaders win power with blunt, absolute messages. The narratives are clear. Enemies exist, threats are imminent, and I alone have the power to protect you. By contrast, Leaders who include many in their circle of concern have to struggle with complexity. They must make trade-offs, accommodate competing interests, and communicate ideas that can take patience to understand and to grasp. The media, social platforms and political discourse favours those who can reduce everything to a slogan. Powerful men behaving badly is not confined to geopolitics. We see it in homes, in workplaces, in boardrooms and in governments. Domestic violence remains at unacceptable levels, where abusers exert dominance over those closest to them. In business, autocratic leaders exploit workers, they bully colleagues and they hoard influence. And in government, the drama is writ large, where leaders, many of whom operate in ways where they are unaccountable to their people, they amass power for themselves and for their allies. These behaviours are not exclusive to any one country or political system. While the current US administration appears to be following the playbook to the letter, the same dynamics exist in corporations, religious institutions and local governments around the world. Wherever power is unchecked, it is abused. So, what are strategies for resistance? The first step to stopping powerful men is to reject their claim to power. Stopping them does not always require violence. Non-violent resistance can strip a leader of power by denying them legitimacy. When the people say, you claim to act for the good of the nation or for peace or for stability, we're not convinced. When they say that, they're not debating, they're not seeking to persuade, they are simply telling the truth. Call it holding ground, call it resistance. Narratives of power crumble when enough people refuse to believe them. Mahatma Gandhi's campaign against the British rule in India did not persuade the British to reconsider imperialism. It forced them to acknowledge that their rule could no longer be sustained. The refusal of millions to recognise British authority stripped it of legitimacy. Sadly, non-violent resistance is not always enough. Stopping power without force requires overwhelming numbers and an organised opposition and the ability to withstand retaliation. When non-violence fails, the reality is stark. The only way to stop them is to remove them. Sometimes this happens at the ballot box. Sometimes it happens through institutional resistance, military refusals, economic collapse, or legal prosecution. And sometimes it happens through outright rebellion. Now, between non-violent resistance and outright rebellion is the field of psychological action. In the TED Talk I delivered about a year ago, I described how people seeking power over others use an identifiable tactic to win it using 3 psychological actions. Number 1, to destabilise. The world is dangerous, there are bad people who would take what is yours. Number 2, to reassure, casting myself as your only option. I, and I alone, have the power to protect you. And number 3, to coerce. I can only do that if you do as I say. I confess to feeling like a Cassandra warning that democracy would fail. My ham-fisted attempts to shift the dial on domestic violence education, workplace cultures and dishonest electioneering have to this point failed. What I've learned is that the ubiquity of aggressive psychological action goes undetected because most people, no matter how smart or well-intentioned, they cannot see it, let alone describe it. This lack of awareness and understanding robs people of the opportunity to develop strategies for psychological self-defense. This gaping vacuum of human understanding leaves people, especially women, vulnerable to coercion and control. It leaves workers disempowered and fearful. It makes electorates dull and pliable. This would break my heart, except for the fact that there's still breath in my body and I will keep plugging away. In the coming years, we will see true leaders act in the service of many. Some will garner support. Others will be isolated and punished. My call to action for you is to consult your values. Consider courageous and competent action in the service of the people, the communities, the institutions, and the traditions that are important to you. Consider acting in ways that celebrate your human dignity and that of others. Be optimistic. The fundamental truth remains: unchecked power does not last forever. The arrogant overreach, the oppressed push back, and history repeats itself. The powerful will act as they please until they're stopped.